This video is brought to you by ASRock and the ASRock X570 Velocita. At least I think I'm saying that right. This is a high-end 14 power phase design support, for DDR4 5000 motherboard for AM4. So your Ryzen 5000 CPUs here are going to just drop right in. It's got a killer E3100 2.5 gigabit LAN along with a killer AX1650. That's a Wi-Fi 6 adapter. That's a pretty unique combination if you're looking for killer networking on your motherboard or anything like that. This motherboard also features a high-end implementation of the Realtek ALC 1220 audio codec. It has an NE5532 premium headset amplifier as part of the front panel connection with support for up to 600 ohm headsets. That's part of that Nahimic audio implementation. This motherboard has a low-key black and gray aesthetic, but full RGB support with multiple ARGB and 5050 style RGB headers, so it'll go perfect with whatever your next build is. It's also got a pretty good PCIe layout in terms of if you've got a triple slot GPU or you're going to run multiple GPUs. That's not really a thing anymore, but you could run 2 GPUs for like a pass-through type configuration or running virtual machines. This is a pretty high-end motherboard with a fairly high-end, power delivery implementation, even if you wanted to run a 16-core. But, it's pretty affordable too. So ASRock's done a good job balancing features here, I think, if you're looking for a gaming motherboard, especially one that has the killer NIC setup.
Let's talk about a sensitive issue that you might not be ready to talk about, and that is dependence. You wake up and you look at YouTube. You get in your car and you turn on Spotify. At work, you sweatily run to the bathroom to get in a Stadia game just so that you can get the shakes off long enough to get home to your Netflix. You have an addiction to the cloud. Now, I'm being somewhat hyperbolic there. Obviously, nobody's using Stadia. But it's a problem that you have, and you might regret it. Because if you ask someone from Belarus or Sudan or Turkey or Congo or a list of other countries, your stream to the cloud could be turned off. And what will you do? Let's say that there's some future date, I don't know, let's say November 4th, when things get really weird and someone decides, hey, we need to turn off the internet. What are you going to do? I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. The same thing I've been doing for the entire pandemic. I'm going to be working my way through the last 30 years of action movies because I have data hoarding and network attached storage. And we're going to talk about some options for that today. Today we're going to be talking about TrueNAS. What is TrueNAS, you ask? Well, it used to be FreeNAS, and now it's been sort of segmented into different products. Anyway, we're going to talk about TrueNAS Core, which is what FreeNAS used to be. This is network attached storage. It's based on FreeBSD, and it is free and open source. And we're going to be using that to create some data hoarding opportunities for ourselves. Now, the installation of TrueNAS Core is really, really simple. I did not capture any footage of this. There are only 2 interactive points to it. You tell it where you want to install TrueNAS Core, and you set a root password. That's it. Other than you need to prepare your installation media. I used Rufus on Windows, but any way that you write an image, you should be aware of how to write an image, I hope. Now, unfortunately, the installation, as simple as it is, cost me, I would say, 12 hours of my life and a record amount of frustration. You see, this is my major complaint with TrueNAS Core. If you look at the minimum requirements, it will recommend a USB drive to operate TrueNAS from. If you go through the wizard of installing, well, there's only one way to go through it, it will say, we recommend installing to a USB drive. I would recommend you not install to a USB drive. You see, there is a critical flaw, and it's based around this new version of FreeBSD writing too quickly and I guess too efficiently to work with modern USB drives. So the first time I installed TrueNAS, it took about 3 or 4 hours. I lost track, I walked away from it. And I thought, that's weird. And then it wouldn't boot. The middleware would always time out. And I kept trying over and over, I kept having the same problem. And I thought, hey, I had like an old Micro Center USB drive, and I maligned Micro Center when I shouldn't have. It wasn't their fault. So I started going through other USB drives that I had. I think I found a Crucial that actually worked. It only took 30 minutes to install, and it booted. And I was like, oh, so my USB drives must be overwritten too many times. They're old, they're beat up. Okay, my fault. I've got the Crucial drive, it works. Now, unfortunately, I lost that footage, so I had to start over. And knowing I had to start over, I went to Amazon and I said, let me get some fresh, brand new USB drives. So I got two of them. I got this SanDisk and I got a PNY. And I redid the installation, 4 hours, failure to boot. After some Googling, it turns out USB 3.0 is the problem here. You see, USB 3.0 is too fast, and it causes overheating and kind of like a data jamming situation with your USB. I didn't have a single, I tested 4 different kinds of USB 3.0 drives to install TrueNAS. All of them failed. And they don't fail in predictable ways. They take 3 hours to install, that's your first sign, but then the boot just fails. There's a middleware load that has a 240-second timeout. It will time out every single time because the drive just overheats and it can't read or write fast enough, so it fails. But it doesn't tell you that it's not obvious how it fails. And therein lies the frustration. Now, the Crucial that did work, it was a USB 2.0. It worked. The installation was 30 minutes. It boots most of the time. If it's already hot and you try to boot, sometimes you'll time out that middleware again, which again, extremely frustrating. Now, if you read the forums, not the technical documentation, to be fair, the recommended system requirements do not include USB drive. They say to use an SSD. If you use an SSD, installation takes about 3 minutes and it boots every single time. I did have another problem though. The first time I installed the SSD, it installed beautifully, but it couldn't find the web GUI. It couldn't get an IP address. And I banged my head against that for a while. Ultimately, just rewriting the image again to a fresh USB and reinstalling the SSD again worked. So I don't even know what went wrong there, but it does show that there was a lot of frustrations with the TrueNAS installer. So just, if you're gonna go with this, I would definitely recommend don't try to use a USB as your operating system drive, which is unfortunate because that was one of the things I loved about FreeNAS. Hey gang, slightly further in the future, Ryan here for a quick addendum to this video. I said some pretty bad things about the TrueNAS installer here. One of our intrepid editors pointed out that the installation documentation doesn't match what I said about the USB installer. And I was sure that it did, so I thought, did they just change that, or has 2020 finally taken its toll on me? No, the real answer is perhaps more frustrating. 2 sets of documentation. There's TrueNAS.com documentation, and there's docs.ixsystem.com documentation. I was using the latter. Now, if you look at TrueNAS.com, the system requirements now says USB stick is not recommended. This has actually changed since last night. It had some like misspelled words last night, so they're actively working on this. But they're not actively working on docs.ixsystem.com. As you can see, same exact layout, same document, hardware requirements, but here they still list USB stick as being valid. So the canon now is no USB stick. Bad documentation, but okay. The other thing I say is that they encourage USB use in the installer. I was talking about this image. Actually, the word they use is flash media. SSDs, technically flash media, but it's only one kind of flash media. Out of all the kinds of flash media, I'm pretty sure that's the only one that would work. Hey, if you want to go crazy, try to install this on an SD card, see what happens. I don't think you'll have a good time with it. So, I don't want to vilify them more than I have to, but I will say that bad documentation, just don't use USB, and I don't think they get a good enough job telling us about that. By default, TrueNAS will map itself to truenas.local on your network, or you can use the IP address that it shows you on the terminal when it's done booting for the first time. And you'll be greeted with this screen. The username is going to be root for your first login, And the password is the password that you set during the installation process. Once you log in, you're gonna get some information about your system. You can see we're skating on the very, very low end, actually the bare minimum of the system requirements. We have a 64-bit processor, 8 gigabytes of memory, and a network interface. And we're running off of USB, as I mentioned before, but I don't recommend it. The first task you're probably gonna wanna do with TrueNAS is to create a pool. So we'll go to storage and pools. And what we're going to do is we're going to organize our physical drives into a single unit, into a pool. So on this screen, we'll go to add and create a new pool. And here we can see our physical drives. Now we used to have 4 of these drives. One of them died. So now we're stuck with 3 and the SSD here, which I threw in just for demonstrative purposes in terms of caching. So you can use this suggest layout, and basically what that's going to do is it's going to look at the number of identical drives you have and try to suggest how you might use them. But you can also do it manually. Now it's interesting because it will limit you. So it has this weird interface where you use the arrows to feed into the data VDEVs. This is the actual data drives we're going to put in our pool. So if you put 1 in, then you're not going to have any choices down here as to the type of VDEV we're doing. This is just a stripe. Basically, it's treated as what it is, just one hard disk. Now, if you add another one, you will expand your options, and actually by default, it will switch to mirror. So now we have data redundancy. We have one drive that is backing up the other. We could go back to stripe if we didn't want any sort of data redundancy, and then we would get the full value of both drives' storage. And like I said, these are old Western Digital hard drives. One of them has already died, so I'm not too confident about them. I'm not going to be storing anything mission critical, but I do think I would like to have some redundancy. And by adding a 3rd drive to this, I will get the RAID Z option, which is going to give me the most storage with a little bit of redundancy. So I think I'll go with that. Now, there are other types of options in terms of how we want to structure the layout of our VDEV. And with 4 drives, we could move up to RAID Z2 for our options. However, as you can see, these are not identical disks. When we mix in the SSD, it's a different size, so we actually cannot create that. The SSD is here actually to demonstrate one of the things that TrueNAS can do, which is to add a drive for a very specific use case. In this case, we'll do cache. Now, the thing about this build having 8 gigabytes of RAM, a cache is going to do almost nothing. It may actually be detrimental to this pool. You want to max out your RAM before you start messing around with cache, because it's probably going to be counterproductive. But just for demonstration purposes, now you can see that there are other things that you can do here. You can have logging, metadata, and hot spare. That's a cool one. So if you have, if you're worried about your drives failing, what I could do here if I wanted, instead of using 3 drives in RAID Z, I could use 2 drives with a hot spare in case one ever goes bad. And I'd still only get the storage of the 2 to stripe them, but you always have the hot spare. We'll use a cache here and put the SSD in there. It's not going to help us, but we'll do it anyway just for demonstration purposes. If you have a lot of RAM and the right setup, this could really improve speeds. Now, you also have to keep in mind, how are you going to use this drive? This is, for me, this is going to be, I didn't name it. You need to name it. I'm going to name this media. It's going to be a media server. A media server might not be something that is hugely beneficial from a cache. Also, a cache will be good for something where you're hitting the same files over and over. Maybe an office, where people are opening the same document in different offices and stuff like that. For this use case, though, not a great idea. We're just going to do it just to show it. One thing I won't be demonstrating is encryption. Now, you do have the opportunity to turn on encryption for your disks. This has risks involved with it, and I don't need it for my home media server, but it is an interesting option that TrueNAS gives you. So with all that said, we will take our RAID Z 3 disk with a SSD cache, and we will create a pool that will give us 1.36 terabytes to work with. Gotta be sure, don't want to format those disks without this warning. Ultimately, because this is going to be my media server, what I want to do is I want to set up an SMB share. So I'm going to have Windows computers connected to all my televisions and a Surface tablet to stream music. And that's the video and music is going to come from this media server. Now I have this monolithic pool, which is all of my available drives. And I could go ahead and share that entire pool, but I may want to categorize the things inside this pool into smaller sections, and that is where we get data sets. So within the pool, we can create a data set, and we can use those data sets for our shares and user permissions and stuff like that, instead of the entire pool. So we're still using the same hardware in the RAID Z setup, but within it, we get these new entities that we can work with inside of TrueNAS. So going to the pool storage page, we hit the dots over here, and we can add a data set. There are a lot of options here, but you really don't need them all. The only one that's required is the name. We'll take a look at a couple of them here though. So you can set quotas, you can set compression, synchronization, you can add comments for it, and then the advanced options down here, snapshots, inheritance, things like that. We're going to stick with the basic. So this is going to be inside of our media pool. This is going to be our video data set where I'll store video that I will stream to my televisions, and give it the name, click submit. So now within our media pool, we have video. So obviously I want my video to be available to my Windows computers, which are connected to my televisions. So to do that, I want to set up SMB shares, but first I need to create a user that can connect to those shares. So we have our root user, but obviously we don't want to use our root user for our media sharing. So we'll go to accounts and users and add a new user. This is going to be me. Username will be Ryan. I will give it a password. You can choose your own user ID if you want. You can give it an existing group, but since we don't have any, or since we're giving it a primary group, a new primary group, that's grayed out. We will go ahead and give Ryan his own group, which will make it easier to deal with our shares later. I'm not going to worry about a home directory because I don't really care about using a home directory with him. He's just going to access the data set, the video data set, to get video to the televisions. I am going to turn on Microsoft account because I will be connecting via Windows to this. Obviously you can do some SSH keys and stuff like that here. Not going to bother with that. I will do basic password authentication. Now with my user created that I'm going to use to access my media share, specifically my video media, I can go ahead and set up that share by heading over to sharing. And under the sharing, you have all the different types of shares you can set up. Again, I will be using Windows machines to access my videos. So I will create a Windows share. And we don't have any right now, so let's add. The path is the only required field, and you can get that automatically by browsing your storage up here. Of course, we have the media pool in which we have the video data set. And when we click on that, it will automatically fill out our name. You could change that to something else if you want. And we don't really need to set up any other parameters. We do have quite a few advanced options here. Right now, this is going to give us the basic Windows stuff. The ACL This is going to be discoverable on the network. It's going to be available for shadow copy. If you want to mess around with these, you can't really click on them unless you switch up your share parameters to no presets, and then you're allowed to choose whatever options you want. There are also a number of different presets already set up here for you that will change how these things work. We'll go with the default parameters, and we will create our share. It wants to enable SMB, which it wasn't already. We definitely want that. When we set up our share, we were prompted to edit the ACL of the dataset. And the ACL, the access control list, is a way of setting up which users can access this share and do various things within it. So instead of using the shortcut, this is the way that you get to it normally. You come back to the pools menu, and inside our video dataset, which is what we're sharing, we go over to edit permissions. So this basic ACL access control list is going to set up three things. The group at means the group that owns it, in this case wheel. The owner at means the user that owns it, in this case root. And everyone at means everyone else outside of these two entities. So for my media share, I don't want anybody else accessing it. I'm going to go ahead and delete that one. The only thing I'm going to change here is I'm going to add inheritance to both the user and owner, user, and owner group. And then I'm going to create a new ACL item. Now the owner and group, it's root and wheel. I don't expect those users to be in Windows accessing over SMB. This is for the user that I do expect to be accessing over SMB. And that is via a group. And this is the group of the user that we just created, which will be Ryan. And we want to allow, and we're going to go for advanced permissions. And basically, we're going to give Ryan access to everything. So I want to be able to do whatever I want within my video share via SMB. And we will set the inherit, and this will take care of having access via Windows to our new share. Now you can put whatever users you want in here. Obviously, let's say that you're having somebody over to your house and you want them to be able to watch your movies but not necessarily delete them. Then you create a new user, create another ACL item, give it read-only permissions, and things of that nature. With our pool, dataset, share, and user created, we can move over to Windows and test our access for this. You will access TrueNAS with //TrueNAS. You can also use / and the IP address that TrueNAS shows you on the terminal when it boots. And there's video. Now you would normally be challenged for username and password. I've already authenticated in this Windows session. But you just use the user that you created. In this case, I created the user Ryan, and so I authenticated as user Ryan. Here we are. This is our video data set. Now, Ryan doesn't have access to the pool, so only video will be visible to that user. And you could create multiple data sets with different users, which I probably will do. We'll just go in here and let's make sure. Now, we did use inheritance, so we should be able to create a subdirectory. Let's call this one movies, and go into that subdirectory, and we should have full control to do whatever we want. Let's create a text document and modify it. Oh, you guys can't see the notepad editor. Just imagine the notepad editor. And I'm making some changes, and they saved. Delete it. Step out. Delete the folder, and there I go. I've got full access to my SMB share on TrueNAS with the RAID Z file system. Now, we really are only scratching the surface of what TrueNAS can do. I'm really, when it comes to the network attached storage, I'm really just looking for network attached storage. And this, you can use it for that basic thing, but it does have a lot of other stuff And without going into much detail, backups and snapshots, it's very powerful to automatically do backups and keep snapshots of your storage. If you have very valuable stuff, you can do that over the network. You can do it right there on the file system. The jails and the arrangement of keeping things separated from one another has a very in-depth stuff. They even have, you can spin up virtual machines here, which I don't need that from my NAS, but it's cool to know that it's there. Right. One thing we will take a real quick look at are the plugins. And so we have to choose a pool. We've only got one to choose from. We'll choose media. And the plugins are, just other applications that you can run on your TrueNAS system. And I gotta say, back in the FreeNAS days, I ran some NZB programs, which we are not allowed to talk about. I didn't have a great experience with that. The permissions were kind of a pain, and updates were also kind of a pain. I might have made some mistakes there, but for the most part, I didn't see any reason to use FreeNAS for that kind of thing when I have other Linux systems in my house. But just for the sake of checking them out. Now, these are the first party ones. Plex is something that a lot of people like to use. I have Windows machines, as I mentioned, connected to every TV that I own, so I'm not really interested in that. But one thing that does interest me now, I did a video recently about an ebook reader that runs on Linux. And a lot of people commented and say, what about Calibre? I think it's Calibre and not Calibra. I'm going to say Calibre. And I didn't know Calibre had a web reader. Apparently that's a new thing. I remember reading about Calibre back in the day, but they've expanded it seems. So now they have a web interface with bookmarking and keeping track of your progress and stuff like that. I really like the idea of that. And Calibre Web is one of the third-party plugins that comes with TrueNAS. So I figured, why not check that out? So you just head on over to the plugins. Now we're switching to IX Systems is the new owner of TrueNAS. It used to be FreeNAS, now it's TrueNAS. Community are a third party. So let's install. It's unofficial. It's probably gonna do terrible things. Throw caution to the wind. And here we go. So it's gonna require a jail name. Let's just call it Calibre. See what kind of advanced options it gives me. Auto start seems okay. Let's call it Calibre. I'll just run with it, see what happens. Now the first installation of Calibre plugin failed. No default instance found. A second install where I have used the basic options seems to be succeeding. I have to say this is pretty much, it's in line with my experience with TrueNAS so far, which is a lot of stuff is obtuse and broken in ways that are very difficult to understand. It does seem to be succeeding at this point, so we'll see. Our second attempt at Calibre has resulted in what seems to be a successful installation, and we are given an administrative portal URL. However, it does not seem to be answering. I did some Googling. It seems like I'm not the only one having a problem here. There were some workarounds that involved going into the shell and rearranging some things and running some commands. However, that kind of betrays the whole idea of the one-click plugin. And why wouldn't I just install Calibre in a more desirable system? So, kind of galvanizes my experience with FreeNAS and now TrueNAS, especially when it comes to plugins. I just don't see any reason to do it. They are not reliable. They have some weird quirks that come from just porting them into this system. It doesn't seem like a lot of work has gone into that. In terms of file sharing, though, this does seem to work great. I like the interface. It's not the easiest system to use. There is a little bit of a learning curve, but it does offer quite a bit of depth, way more than I even care to use for network attached storage. However, the installation process was infuriating, and the failures, especially when in the official hardware requirements and even the installation process, they encourage USB installation. USB installation is a disaster. So it's a mixed bag, but if you're just looking for some network attached storage and maybe even some of the more in-depth features, based on this plugin, who knows how those virtual machines are going to serve you. Maybe we'll do some more exploration there. But if you want to share files, I'm going to say go ahead, give TrueNAS a shot. This is a release candidate, so there is time, I guess, for them to clean up some of this. But again, based on my experience with FreeNAS, this is pretty much what you're going to get. So in retrospect, when I think about network attached storage, I'm personally more inclined to use it as an appliance. I'm not looking for the depth that TrueNAS gives me. It's nice to have, but I just want to set it up and I want to use it as shares. So for my purposes, TrueNAS I think is perfectly fine, but there are a lot of disappointing things about it, from the installer to the failed plugins to the way that it fails. I had some DHCP problems. You can access it by the IP address, but TrueNAS.local kind of goes in and out. I'm not sure what's causing that. So it's in release candidate status. I personally would expect maybe a little bit more functionality at this point. But looking back at FreeNAS, I had the same kinds of issues with plugins, and I had the same kinds of issues with updates. It seemed like the stability wasn't incredible, but it is a free product, and it does do the core, no pun intended, part of what it needs to do, which is to store things on the network very well. So we might revisit this. We might see if when they have an actual release, if things are much cleaner. I didn't try any of the virtual machine stuff. I didn't try any of the backup or snapshot stuff, but what I did try was definitely a mixed bag. Now this is the standalone version of TrueNAS, TrueNAS Core. They do have another product called TrueNAS Scale, which runs under Linux. And we probably will have a video coming out that explores that as well. Maybe that's a better solution, especially considering the installer issues that we've had with the standalone version for your network attached storage needs. So get started on your data hoarding. You've probably got, depending on when this comes out, you probably got like 15 days to collect all of the music and movies and TV shows to get you through an undetermined amount of internet blackout come November. Get it installed and start collecting, because you're probably going to need it. There's a fly attacking me right now.